Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence as a business. Which AI companies are likely to be successful in the future? What are the most important trends in AI? And how can people profit from the rapid growth of AI? Here to discuss these issues is my guest, Kartik Gada. Kartik is Executive Director at Woodside Capital Partners, a Silicon Valley investment banking firm where he specializes in artificial intelligence companies. He's also the author of The Atom, an online book that describes how people can benefit from disruptive technological changes, and also contains detailed policy recommendations for adapting fiscal and monetary policies to the realities of 21st century technology. Kartik, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Now, I understand artificial technology is growing by leaps and bounds. Just how big an effect is it having on the overall economy right now?
Well, artificial intelligence as a sector itself is still kind of small. It's only $3 billion of revenue, but the impact on the economy is very, very large because it's disrupting almost every other sector of the economy. Each dollar of artificial intelligence sometimes has an effect of $10, $20, $50 on an incumbent industry. And so almost every sector of the economy, from the healthcare sector, legal, logistics, retail, other areas of technology, is being affected right now.
Now, you see a lot of startup companies involved with AI. What sort of things do you look for in a successful startup? What makes a company succeed in this field?
So there are a lot of startups in artificial intelligence and a lot of ones that are late to the game and are entering very quickly. But what we look for is, are they addressing a very large market opportunity? Are they creating a quantum leap of improvement relative to an incumbent technology or a legacy industry? And do they have a path of continuous self-improvement, which is an inherent part of artificial intelligence? And from that, will it create an ever-improving scope of disruption? So those are the primary criteria that one would look for in an artificial intelligence company.
Out of all the companies you see, about what percentage would you say actually get funding?
About 1/3 actually get funding. There is a lot of money pursuing artificial intelligence, but there is a big difference between some companies that get a lot of funding without having to demonstrate any revenue versus companies that are perhaps trying to do something that is being done by many different companies, and it thus not really compelling for any investor per se.
Now, is there a trajectory to AI? Like, everybody knows the direction it's going in. We know what are the big problems that have to be solved. So a company that says that it has the solution to this problem is going to get funded.
It may. The problem is, like, there might be many companies addressing the same problem from multiple directions, or it may be something that is beyond contemporary AI. Some aspects of artificial intelligence are still seen as being many years away, so companies that are addressing that problem now, maybe they have a game-changing solution, or maybe they are just ahead of themselves in that regard, and that is something an investor has to make a determination about.
What are the hottest areas of AI right now for investors? What are people putting the most money in?
So there's two answers to that question. One is horizontal, like what sub-segment of AI is very hot, and the answer to that would be deep learning, which is the newest and most rapidly advancing type of artificial intelligence. And then from a vertical point of view, which industry is being disrupted by AI the most? And the answer to that question would probably be healthcare at this particular time.
Now, you mentioned deep learning. I've heard of that, but don't know a whole lot about it. What exactly does that mean?
So when you take general artificial intelligence, there are many sub-segments in that, like computer vision, natural language processing, and so on. And a more advanced type of artificial intelligence is machine learning, which has come out more recently. And a more advanced subset of that is deep learning. And deep learning, by definition, is a type of AI that finds a solution to a problem without necessarily exposing how it arrived at that solution. The process is often a black box. This is very common in healthcare, where it will diagnose a disease and not really tell people how it did that. It comes up with a very good answer, the correct answer, but you can't reverse engineer how it did that.
So it takes a picture of you, and from that picture it determines that you have cancer?
In some cases, yeah.
Better than a doctor could?
Better than a doctor could. From a blood test, it could determine cancers very, very early. It can diagnose diseases that a human doctor has not been able to diagnose, but it won't exactly tell you how it did that. So that is deep learning.
So I don't understand quite what it's doing. Is it just looking for patterns, looking at all the people who've had this disease in the past and looking at their characteristics and doing a probability check, like people who have this appearance are likely to have this ailment?
It would look at all of those data points, but then it also makes use of something called neural networks. Neural networks effectively simulate how the human brain would work, but at a scale that is extremely complicated and very difficult to reverse engineer. Just like we cannot reverse engineer the human brain, we cannot track everything that a deep learning program does within a neural network. And it may take some input. We don't know exactly what input it has taken in what proportion to come to a diagnosis for that particular ailment on a patient.
So it grows kind of out of human control, but we notice that it produces good results?
Yes,
so
exactly.
we keep using it? Well, I understand that healthcare is a big area for this. So do we have working products right now that are out there in use using AI to diagnose disease?
There are some. For example, IBM Watson, which is very famous for having won Jeopardy in 2011, it is used in many aspects of healthcare right now. There have been instances where a patient had a disease and went to many human doctors and could not find out what the disease was. When the patient went to IBM Watson found that instantaneously, just because it could aggregate input from thousands of patients dispersed across so many geographies. No human doctor would have that much data at their disposal or have met that many patients during their career. And so IBM Watson is used in this type of diagnosis and in cancer research right now.
Now, would it be correct to actually call it intelligence, or is it just a matter of crunching huge quantities of data at high speed to pull out patterns that would not be evident to a human?
That's a large part of it, but there's also a certain kind of special process that occurs, which is more than just the data crunching, and that's when in deep learning you find through a neural net an outcome that could not have just been done through linear computation or serial computation. And that's why it gets closer to human intelligence in a subjective sense that can't necessarily be quantified.
Now, can machines have judgment, like humans are considered to have judgment, in addition to looking at data and coming to conclusions? Or are there some aspects of human intelligence that cannot be replicated by machines, like judgment, or can they ultimately do anything that a human mind can do?
Well, that's a very good question, because it approaches the scale of intelligence from a different direction. Like humans have an intelligence scale, and then the next most intelligent creature, the chimpanzee, and you go backwards from there. But artificial intelligence comes from a different angle. Say there's certain things that artificial intelligence surpassed humans on even 40 years ago, such as calculation. A calculator is a form of artificial intelligence. We just had it for very long. But there's other areas where artificial intelligence just cannot do what a human can, such as comedy. It cannot make jokes that we would find funny, for example. That still may be very far away. So in some areas, it is already very far ahead and has been for a long time. In some areas, it may never get to that point. Judgment is somewhere in the middle, in that judgment relies on data and certain parameters for ethics, but an artificial intelligence can exercise judgment in some areas, like in a medical sense or even a legal sense, but not necessarily all other areas.
Now, I understand that artificial intelligence can also be joined to robots. So you have mobile machines that have some simulation of intelligence that can make intelligent decisions that don't need constant guidance of the human telling them every step to make. Where are we on that?
So that is a very interesting area, because take, for example, manufacturing. There is a robot called the Baxter robot, launched by Rethink Robotics. And most of the media around that talks about how it can do manufacturing work for $1 an hour, so it outcompetes human workers. But that's not the real disruption. The real disruption is how the robot is connected to the cloud, and all robots sold by that company are connected to the cloud. So when one robot learns how to do something new, which often comes in the news that it learned how to do something with one hand or some type of hand-based manipulation, since that goes to the cloud, every single Baxter robot, thousands of miles apart from each other, learns the same thing instantaneously. And that is something that humans can't duplicate. Like if you learn something, you cannot just download that information to me instantaneously. But with these robots, they all learn as soon as one learns.
I've seen some scary science fiction movies like that. Is that something we should be worried about? Maybe the machines will start talking to each other and leave us out of the loop.
Well, machines can certainly learn at a faster rate than humans and are economically more competitive. I never bought into the idea that they would want to subjugate us or get rid of us because they don't compete for the same resources other than electricity. They don't require water or agricultural land or something like that. So they aren't driven by those same motivations.
Would they be driven by what they're programmed to be driven for? Could you create your own army of intelligent robots whose goal is whatever you want the goal to be?
That could be done, but then the opposing force could create an opposing army of robots and keep that under control.
Yeah. I've also heard that a lot of people are worried that they're going to lose their jobs because robots can perform many jobs better and cheaper than humans. For example, we're very close to autonomous vehicles. Millions of people drive trucks and buses and taxi cabs for a living. What's going to happen to all those people if machines take over?
So that is probably the most often discussed subtopic within artificial intelligence because it is for real. Technology does eliminate jobs. That's been going on for a long time, for maybe 2 centuries, but now the speed has increased, so it affects individuals within their career. And what happens is that as artificial intelligence makes more and more tasks more competitive, humans will lose jobs. One example of how that happened in the past was take Microsoft Excel. One could call that a mature type of artificial intelligence. In the 1960s, corporations hired people who did accounting, and they had those notebooks and did everything through long division and just pen and paper based mathematics. And most of those jobs went away because now one person with Microsoft Excel can do what used to take 10 people in the past. That one person today may have a salary 10 times higher as well. But that's 1 relative to 10. So that type of pattern occurs.
But does that generate more work? Because now work can be done for less cost, so you can hire more people, and they can be more productive with these machines.
It often does, and the truth is that in our economy, even if the job market isn't as robust as we would like it to be, there are 145 million jobs, which is the highest there has ever been. So it does generate more work, but that churn is a complicated churn, and a lot of government policies are not necessarily well suited to enable such a dynamic reorientation of the job market landscape and the types of skills that are in demand.
Do you think there's a risk that we might put too much trust in machines? Like maybe we'll be so enamored of artificial intelligence, we'll let it make our foreign policy decisions. We'll put in all the information and say, well, should we declare war or not? Or should we apply sanctions or not?
Well, a lot of decisions that we already make already have a pretty good amount of automation in them, and then we don't notice it anymore. It becomes like the air we breathe. Don't necessarily notice it. Artificial intelligence for major decisions like that in government may actually be a tool because it can create an analysis free of bias and more than, say, a huge number of analysts crunching the numbers could do. So government could be more informed about, say, complicated cause and effect relationships that occur. A human should make the final decision, but the information available and the scenarios played out and cost-benefit analysis would be more precise.
Do you think there's a risk that as machines get more intelligent, humans will become less intelligent? Like people used to be pretty good at their multiplication tables, but now that you have a calculator, you don't have to have that skill anymore.
That has already been happening for a while, and that's inevitable. Many children today just cannot do long division with a pen and paper, but maybe they don't need to do that anymore. We have lost a lot of skills that people, say, in the 19th century all had, and that enables people to focus on perhaps higher tasks or more complicated tasks, and new skill sets always emerge to meet new demands. Being very good at web searching, for example, is a skill set that just didn't exist before, but a Google search is itself an artificial intelligence, and you are working with the artificial intelligence to find information, so that skill becomes more.
Is most AI development strictly in the private sector at this point? I mean, is government working on it like DARPA, or is it all the big private companies like Google and Facebook?
At this point, it's mostly in the private sector. For a while, it was in the public sector through DARPA and other agencies doing various artificial intelligence projects, mostly in the United States, but also in other countries. But at this point, it has moved much more to the private sector.
I've seen another type of technology, which is swarming technology, like, for example, drones, pilotless aircraft. You give a command to the whole fleet, You don't have to control each one individually, and each one knows what it has to do or can figure out what to do to accomplish the task. Is that a big part of the future? Like some people call it ant technology, machines behaving like ants. Each one knows its job without being told.
That's definitely a big part of the future that has applications in the military sense, in an industrial sense, because each robot can do a different task and work with each other. In space exploration, because our space exploration model has been in the form of launching one very large, clunky vehicle to explore, say, an outer planet. But if you launch a swarm of small ones, you get much more data. It's much more robust. All the eggs are not in one basket. Say if there's a malfunction or something, you could lose half of the swarm and not lose that much of the capability.
Do smart machines affect the way we think of ourselves? Could we get to the point that humans are considered more expendable than machines because they can't do as much?
It's hard to say if more expendable, because more expendable by whom? In the job market, yeah, a human may be considered maybe less competitive than a machine, but in the sense of just a society, probably not, because the machine is not competing, like I said, for the same resources or trying to displace the human's existence necessarily.
Well, let's consider the next 10 years or so. What do you think will be the practical effects on most of our lives as far as what kind of AI you have in your house or your place of business? How will our lives look different than they do today?
Well, the interesting thing about almost all technologies, including AI, is that when it becomes mainstream, we often don't notice it anymore, and we forget how life was before this technology. We feel that way about cell phones. I mean, most of us lived for quite a while before cell phone, but we have trouble imagining even what life was like. That's why it's so jarring to look at old television shows from the 70s, 80s, or even 90s, when many situations, say in sitcoms, just couldn't exist without the cell phone or without the internet or something like that. The same will be true for artificial intelligence, because there will be AI in the home that gives you all kinds of data in terms of temperature regulation, the home network, security, your calendar, things like that. The car will have a huge amount of artificial intelligence, some of it self-driving, others just sensing, analytics, connectivity. You will interact with artificial intelligence very often. When you call support for a company, these chatbots are already at the point that they're almost indistinguishable from humans. Many aspects of healthcare will be through AI. You can get a diagnosis, as I was discussing, online. You could upload some pictures and it'll tell you what you have in some cases. So there'll be many uses for artificial intelligence that will seem normal then and become the status quo, so will not be noticed as something very different, even though we don't have those capabilities today.
Now, in addition to working with AI, you've gone a little bit beyond it. You've taken an interest in economics in general, and how do we have to reorganize some of our economic institutions to accommodate the changes involved with AI. In fact, you've written a white paper. It's an online book. You can see it online. And you have some of your policy recommendations for how we can adapt with government institutions. What are some of the high points? I think we have a graphic of it somewhere. There it is. Okay, so what are some of the recommendations that you're making with this?
So I believe I've discovered a connection between technological deflation. Almost every type of technology, certainly artificial intelligence, lowers costs of products, so that creates a certain amount of deflation in the economy. Technology being 2% of world GDP means we can quantify that deflation. At the same time, the central banks of the world are doing a type of monetary easing or money creation. In the US, it's called quantitative easing, but it's also done in Europe, Japan, and so on. And that is not causing inflation. Traditionally, this would cause inflation, but it's not. So I believe that monetary easing is just offsetting technological deflation. And since technology is accelerating both in size and in scope, the amount of this monetary creation has to be permanent and ever rising. That means that money can be diverted to certain fiscal purposes, like replacing government spending a dollar for a dollar and therefore replacing taxation. That would enable us to have a government policy structure more suitable for this accelerating rate of change.
When you talk about creating money, does that mean just printing more money? Like you can have as much money as you want, you just keep the printing presses running?
So it's not exactly printing, because historically printing has caused problem. What it is quantitative easing, but there's a certain amount you can do before which there will be any inflation. And I provide a lot of calculations for what that would be. Right now, the world, in fact, does $200 billion a month of this monetary creation. We've been $18 trillion to date over the last 8 years, 200 billion a month as we speak. And I believe that that is not enough because we are still experiencing zero inflation or deflation.
So the government creates money, and then big banks borrow money from the government and they lend it to other people, and eventually they pay the government back, but the government maintains a lot of money in circulation and keeps it available?
So that is what is being done now. In the United States, the monetary creation involves the Federal Reserve purchasing only two asset types, U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. That is too narrowly concentrated and distorts those sectors. I advocate an expansion of the Federal Reserve's charter so that this money that they produce can be given directly to people. Therefore, you get much deeper diffusion, broader diffusion. It benefits all people equally, whereas right now it concentrates to just a few percent of the population. And you get much more rapid velocity of money because many poorer people will spend the money they receive immediately. It solves this sluggish velocity of money problem that we face in our economy today at present.
So you mentioned something that is often called universal basic income. So what you're saying is that if the government is going to print or create money, instead of just lending it to banks, they can just give it directly to individuals. And as long as the individuals and everyone else believes that has value and are willing to accept it as a medium of exchange, then everybody has sort of a floor. I understand that, I mean, the face of it, a lot of people would say, well, you can't give away something for nothing. In fact, the government gives away a lot of things for nothing. But is there a risk factor to this? Like maybe if people get something for nothing, they'll lose the kind of discipline necessary to achieve great things.
Well, so in many ways, universal basic income is an idea that existed for a long time, but this is an enhancement of that in two ways. For one thing, this rises exponentially. And that's why it's called direct universal exponential stipend, or DUES. And secondly, and most importantly, every other universal basic income proposal involves a tax increase to pay for that. Whereas I say this is only possible with a tax decrease, because then you get enough entrepreneurship and faster technological production, so you get more deflation and a greater amount of this money creation that can be done. It's not free money, but it's more accurately a dividend of technological progress, because we are monetizing technological progress more efficiently and distributing the dividends about it, dividends inherent to that, in a more democratic way. So it's not free money, it requires nurturing of technology to create this self-reinforcing cycle.
Now, assuming that this is a practical idea, and we don't have nearly enough time on this program to investigate it in depth, how would it be implemented? We know how hard it is to get anything involving taxes through the Congress. So if you felt you had a really good economic idea, where would you take it? Who would you shop it to in order to get traction for it?
So I have been shopping this idea for about a year to various factions of people in central banks, both in the United States and Europe. Just last week, I spoke at the European Parliament to discuss this idea, and they're examining it, but it takes a while to understand because it's not one, but 3 or 4 paradigm shifts. And the other audience is in the technology industry, where there's the highest amount of reception. So getting a big name technology backer behind it would help. The reason the technology industry kind of understands this concept more readily is because the technology industry has for decades now produced products that are very deflationary in price. The price may go down 30, 50% each year, whether it's a semiconductor, storage, or software. Yet technology companies are the most profitable. Apple has 60 billion in profit, Google 40 billion. So when your product is deflating and yet you're so profitable, that has kind of unearthed certain types of economic principles that I believe can slowly radiate outwards from the technology industry to the rest of the world over time.
So does it matter that there's enough stuff to go around? It's a question of distributing it, making it cheap for everybody. Even people in the poorest countries have cell phones now that can find a way to afford a cell phone. So it looks like it might really be changing the face of the world. It would
change the face of the world. I contend that income tax is something that future generations, or just the next future one generation, may find obsolete, because you no longer need taxation to fund the safety net of government, and 75 to 80% of government spending is on safety net type programs that exist anyway, or transfer of cash between individuals. So we could formalize that through quantitative easing. Taxation to fund that may no longer be necessary.
The government has often functioned on the model of borrowing money. Every year it has to borrow money or it has to shut down. Do you think the model of living on borrowed money has to change? Maybe we should stop borrowing so much.
We can retire that process because we would no longer have to issue treasuries to just fund the government. Our national debt of $21 trillion not only would cease to be a problem, but it would gradually shrink as the treasuries mature and you're not replenishing the pile of treasuries. So after 10 years, most of that would be gone already, and you would no longer have this type of fiscal structure where you tax people, then you spend more than you tax, and the difference has to be through treasury issuance that go into the debt.
Well, what is the glue that really holds the economy together? We just have a couple of minutes. Is it trust, the fact that people trust each other, like you trust that money is worth something, you trust that the stock market isn't going to crash tomorrow? I mean, is it technology that holds society together, or is it more like the personal relationships and trust that people have for one another that keeps it together?
Well, the market will still have crashes and there will still be recessions, albeit shorter in duration. But what really makes it work is the realignment of incentive structures. I mean, we're accustomed to a top tax bracket of 45, 50, or in California, 56.7%. When income tax over a 10-year gradual phase out gets as low as 0, the incentives are very different. The upside for entrepreneurship is very high. The return on work is twice as much because you went from 50% tax to 0. That will produce more output and produce more economic activity of value. Human nature doesn't necessarily change, but the incentive structure gets adapted towards something that is more favorable because now we have the prosperity and the technological medium through which to enable that type of policy structure.
Okay, very good. And we're going to have to wrap it there because we are out of time. I'd like to thank you for being here today. Very interesting conversation. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. I've been speaking with Kartik Gada. We'll see you next time.